In this course, we're going to build into Laravel functionality to prevent multiple form submissions. You might have come across this issue before, but I'm going to go ahead and demo this out here now with just a really simple form which will eventually create something or do something to your app. Now, the button here, when we submit this, will go ahead and store a post. We're not actually storing a post here. But you can see here that I've included a log. That's going to give us a good idea if we open up the Laravel log as to how many times this has actually been run. And then, of course, we just redirect over to another route. In this case, it's just post show with the ID of the post that we created. Now, we've got a sleep in here because, of course, some operations within an app are going to take a little bit of time. It doesn't really matter how long these take, but what this allows us to do is quickly submit this twice by just double clicking on it and seeing this hopefully logged out twice. And then we'll look at the middleware that we're going to bring in to get this working. So I'm going to go ahead and just double click on this really quickly. And now that's been redirected over. If we head over to the Laravel log, sure enough, this has been run twice because we've, of course, sent 2 requests through simultaneously. So that's a bit of a problem. Of course, there are solutions around this. For example, you might use JavaScript to disable the button once it's been clicked once. If an error comes back, of course, it's going to be re-enabled. But if you want to handle this on the server side, then this course is going to guide you through creating out the middleware to generate tokens, check these, and also redirect the user properly so they don't see an error. Now, let's just see what I mean by that. Now, at the moment, we are redirecting over to the user's post that they've created. Let's bring this middleware in for this route that we're going to be building in the course. So this is prevent multiple submission, and we're only applying that to the store method, of course, because we don't want to check any tokens when we create or show anything. Now, over in the create form that we can see over on the screen, as well as the button and our normal cross-site request forgery protection, we've also got this safe submit blade directive, which we're going to be building out. Now, all that does is apply a token to the form. So if we just inspect the form here, you can see that we've got this safe submit token. That's been generated via middleware, and it will be checked to make sure that it doesn't match when we go ahead and submit this through. So just by bringing this middleware in, what that's going to do is if I now double click on it, you'll see we get a 419. And if we head over to our Laravel log, sure enough, it's only now been stored once. So we've prevented the second request from storing that information again, or more appropriately, just running this again. So it's checking that at the middleware level. Now, this is a little bit annoying because you probably don't want to show a page like this to a user if they do accidentally double click on it. What you probably want to do is redirect the user over to the intended location, but in the background silently fail the second request to that method. Well, we're going to be bringing in some functionality to allow this as well, and that is using the safe submit service that we are going to be creating an intended route. So what this will do is it will store in your session the actual route that you want to redirect the user over to. So the first time this runs, it will be successful. We'll return this response using the route that we want to actually redirect to, and we can still pass anything we want into here. And then on the second request, if this fails, e.g. if we run this and we've already run it with the same token that we have in our form, instead we're just going to be redirected over to the intended location. So let's go and clear the Laravel logout just so we can see this in action. And if we come over to the post create page and click on that once, that was of course just going to work as normal, so that gets stored. Now, if we go back and we click on it twice very quickly and send 2 requests, notice it almost just looks as if we have created that normally and redirected the user over, which in fact we have done. But you can see here it's only been invoked once. This store method has only been invoked once. So we are going to be implementing this in the course because, of course, for user experience, rather than showing an error, you probably just want to deal with this and almost make it look as if nothing has happened behind the scenes. So let's go ahead and start to build this functionality up. We're going to look at a really simple solution in the next part just to kind of understand how this process works. And then we'll start to build this out into a service here and build up our middleware to handle this. So it's a little bit easier to implement on any of the routes that you want to protect. Let's start by just recreating this problem. So I've just gone ahead and created a completely fresh Laravel app. We're not working with our database here, so I've not set anything else up. The first thing that we're going to do is create out that post controller that we saw from the introduction. So let's go ahead and make a controller in here and just call that post controller. Of course, this can work for absolutely anything that you actually submit through, so it doesn't really matter what you're working with here. Let's create out a create method in here, which returns a view, and that's going to be just posts create. And let's go ahead and just create that under views. So posts and create.blade.php, which will be a really simple form. So let's just build that out now really quickly and set the action through to the root in a minute and the method here to post. We need to make sure that we bring in our cross-site request forgery field in here, and we'll just create a button with a type of submit and just say create post, just to keep things really simple. So let's go over to root and web and let's just add this in here. So that's going to be a get root for posts and create, and we'll just reference the post controller in here and the create method. And let's head over to /posts/create and just make sure we import that controller. Great. Okay, so there's our form. Let's go and submit this through then to that create method. And let's just do something in here. And for now, we're going to go ahead and log out created. And actually, that's going to be store. And if we come over to web, let's just copy this, post that through to posts, and we'll reference the store method, and we will give this a name. So let's just call that posts store, and let's go ahead and hook that up to our form. So that's going to be a route through to posts store. Okay, great. So we should now be able to see this logged out. Let's click on create post and let's go over to our Laravel log, and sure enough we see created. Great. Okay, so the goal here then is of course to get this method to submit twice. That's very difficult if you're just doing something like this. So instead we're going to go ahead and sleep this for 1 second, as we saw from the introduction. And what that will do is give us a chance to double click this, have 2 requests being sent through, and then of course 2 of these are now logged out, and that's potentially 2 things that you're doing inside of store. It's really important to know at this point, you'll probably want to actually protect this anyway. So for example, if you are creating a post, you'll probably want to make sure that something is unique in here, like a slug. Or if you are adding something like a like to a post, make sure that you can't create these in too frequent intervals. But again, it really depends on what you're building here. Now, the last thing I want to do is just redirect over to a show page, just so we've got all this pulled together and we can make sure that this works nicely. So let's return a view in here and we'll just say posts show, and into this we'll get an ID, but we're not actually going to use it. And let's go over to roots and web and let's just create this out in here. So posts/ID and make sure that's get. And of course, just make sure we create that view out really quickly. So let's put that in views and posts and show.play.php. Once we have double clicked that, and of course we still get the issue where we're creating this twice, which is great. So that's pretty much our setup here. A normal flow for creating a form, going ahead and submitting it and showing what's been created. Let's just finish off by in show.blade.php just saying post created, just so we know where we end up. And that's pretty much it, all tied together. So now that we've got the basic structure here, let's head over to the next part and start to look at how we might protect this by sending a token down and checking it inside of store. So the simplest way to solve this problem is at the point where we show our form, create a token and send that down to our form. When we submit that form, we want to check up here if it matches. If the token does match, we can continue. Otherwise, we're going to regenerate a token. What that means is on the second request, once we've regenerated the token, it will then not match, and then we can fail the request. So if you wanted, you could just leave the solution as what we're about to implement, but of course we're going to be tidying it up through the course to make it a lot easier to use in multiple forms. So let's start by just using Laravel session helper to make a token in here, and I'm just going to put this as ABC for now. We can generate this out as a full token, but let's just play around with this as a single value. Let's go ahead and pass this down to our view just as token, and we'll assign that in here at the same time as passing it in. So over in create, let's go ahead and create out a hidden input with the name of token and the value of that token value that we're passing down. So that's now over in our form, and we can see that just here. Okay, so the next thing is when we submit this down to store, we want to check if it doesn't match. So let's go ahead and check if the request token doesn't equal from session get token. Now if that's the case and it doesn't match, that means it's been regenerated down here, and that means we're sending this across a second time. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and abort the request with any status code that you see fit. I'm just going to use 419, which is the default used by Laravel's cross-site request forgery protection. So at this point, we want to regenerate the token, and that means that the second request round, this won't match. So let's go ahead and just generate this out with a completely different value. It doesn't really matter for now. So generate the token and send it to the form. Check it here for the first request. regenerate it, and then on the second request, this will then fail because we're sending that original token down, but it's already been regenerated at this point. Let's try this out. So I'm going to click it once, and sure enough, we're redirected over to the intended place. If I double click it really quickly, sure enough, the second time round, that token's been regenerated and doesn't match. So we go ahead and abort the request. So you could technically just use this solution, but of course we want to take this further, make it easier to implement. So in the next part, what we're going to be doing is starting out by generating the token over in middleware, so we don't have to generate it out inside of here every single time and pass it down to our form. So let's move this line specifically over to a piece of middleware so we don't have to handle the generation of this inside of each of our forms. So let's go ahead and make out some middleware with Laravel, and let's call this generate safe submit token. Now safe submit is the name that we're kind of giving to this functionality, whether it was pulled into a package or not, but we kind of want a unified name for all of this. Okay, so let's open up generate safe submit token, and we're just literally going to copy this and put that into the handle method. Now, of course, we can't really pass the token down to where we want to use it. You could add it to the request, but let's go ahead and get rid of the token assignment here and instead just pluck this out. So instead of doing this, let's assign this to token like this by getting it from the session. And of course, we can just pass this down as normal, and a little bit later on, we'll create a blade directive to automatically pluck this out so we can put it in our form. So over in our kernel for HTTP, let's add this just down here under the web group. So let's change this to generate safe submit token. So if we head over to the browser and click this once, sure enough, that works. Now, if we click it twice, this is actually not going to work, and I'll explain why. So let's double click this, and you can see that that still goes through. And sure enough, over in our Laravel log, we will have been dumping this out twice. So let's go ahead and double click that again, and we'll see it roll in there twice with both requests. Now, the reason that this doesn't work is now we've moved this over to middleware, and more specifically because we've applied it globally to all web, what's happening is over in the post controller, it's being generated here or being plucked out here. But then this is being completely overridden by that, because at the point we reached this the second time around, the middleware is taking effect and setting it back to ABC. Now, let's just try this out with Laravel's string helper. So we're just going to say string random, and let's set this to be 40 in length, and make sure we just import the Illuminate support string helper. And then over in the post controller, we can do the same thing over here. So let's just say string random and 40, and let's go ahead and import that class again. Okay, let's just try this out one more time. So let's go over and just click create post normally. And now we come up across with another problem, which is that the fact that when we generate this in here, we're generating it again differently for this request over in store. So really, the way to get around this is to only do this when we are reading, not posting through anywhere. Now, there's a couple of ways that you could do this. You could take this out of the web middleware group, and you could specifically apply it in here. So for example, you could create out your constructor in the post controller, and you could go ahead and apply this specific middleware to the create page. So that is generate safe submit token. And you can only apply that to create. That's your form. So let's make sure we import the middleware here, and let's get rid of this temporarily from web. So that would work because we're only doing this when we land on here, and then when we get to this point, we are not regenerating that token, so it's not failing automatically. So if I click this through once, it works. If I click it twice, or if I just refresh the same page, then it won't work again. So let's just refresh and double click, and we get a 419. So that's one solution, pulling this out of here and only using it for the form. But what you might want to do is not have to think about this while you're building your pages. So we're not going to go down that route, although that's absolutely fine. We're going to bring this back into the overall web group. But in here, we're going to do something very similar to Laravel's cross-site request forgery token middleware. Let's open this up and see what this does. Let's open it up within the Laravel framework. Now, let's take a look at this, and we can see here we've got a check here when we handle is reading. So let's head down to is reading and actually just steal this over and pop this in here. So this will only then be run if we are reading, not actually posting or patching or putting to the request. So we can just say this is reading, and we'll pass our request object in there. So that should be enough to make this work. Let's go back over here, submit this once. That's worked. And now the second time round, when we post through, and over in our post controller, we get to this point, the token won't be regenerated, and therefore we won't see this issue. So let's double click on here, and there we go. Great. So that's now working. We've got this globally now, so we don't need to think about it, but we're only generating a token when we are using a head, get, or options request. We're going to start to move things like the generation of the token over to a service class just to make it a little bit easier to manage. So by this I mean literally just creating a class that handles anything to do with what we're building. For example, generating a token, over in our post controller, getting the token, and a couple of other bits that we'll add in later as well. And of course, by doing that, when we generate the token here, we can also use the same service class method here as well. So it just makes things a little bit easier to manage and keeps everything in one place. So over in app, we can do pretty much anything in here. Just create a safe submit directory just to keep everything that we create in relation to that in one place. And let's create this class out now. So let's call this safe submit, and let's go ahead and just add a namespace to this. So that's of course now going to be app and safe submit. So we're kind of building this out like a package. Now inside of here, let's create our method to first of all regenerate a token. So we can pretty much just take the code that we have here and put that in there. Now with the name of the key, it would probably be a good idea to put this in a method so we can retrieve it, change it if we need to. So let's say token key, and let's create a protected property up here called token key, and let's set that to something that we would actually want to use. For example, safe submit token, and the token key method would return the token key from there just so we can access that a little bit easier. So in here we can now say this token key, makes it a little bit nicer, and we can keep this in here. Or we could refactor this out to be a completely different method in case we needed to change this really quickly. So let's say generate token ID, and let's grab this, put that down there, and then let's say this generate token ID. Now let's make sure we put our string helper in, and now we need to figure out how we're going to use this both in the middleware and also in the post controller. For that, we're going to go ahead and create our service provider. So let's go and make out a provider here called safe submit service provider, and let's open that up, and let's just put this in boot. So what we want to do is bind this under the class name. Of course, it would be better to bind this under an interface, but for now we'll just bind this directly under the class name, and we want to return a new safe submit instance. So let's make sure we import this, come over to config and app, and we can come down to our package service providers or application service providers and add this in here. So that's safe submit service provider. Okay, so now what we can start to do, now that we've bound this into our container, is access this in here. We could in fact just inject this in. So let's say safe submit, and make sure we import the class for this. And then down here we can replace this line out with safe submit regenerate token, like so. And we can do the same thing over in the middleware here. For that, we're going to need to just say safe submit and plug that out of our container using the name that we bound it into, safe submit. And again, just make sure we pull that in here. And then in here, we can just reference that instance and just say, again, regenerate token, like so. Let's go over and just check this out. So if I click create post, that works. If I double click this, it does work, but that is probably just because if we just head over to our post controller, we are saying session get token here. So this would be a good candidate to move over to safe submit as well. So let's create a method out in here which actually gets the token value. So let's say, just call this token. And from here, we would just return session get, but now we've got that specific key in here. It's a lot easier. We can just reference token key, and then if this changes, it will be reflected anywhere. So now over in our post controller, we can use safe submit and token, which makes it a little bit easier to read as well, rather than having the session stuff all over the place. Let's try this out again, click it once. It looks like that failed, so we probably got somewhere else where this isn't quite right, and yeah, we've got the same thing here. So although we're not going to do this, let's inject this into here as well, and then again reference safe submit and token. So that should do the trick. Let's try this out again, and that first request looks like it was fine. Let's double submit that, and we get a 419. Great. So we've successfully now moved this over to something that's bound in the container where everything lives. So it's a little bit easier to go ahead and see what we're doing, reference everything directly within one class. And we're going to be adding to this to include any other helpers that we need just to retrieve things, just to make sure that everything is nicely in one place. We're now going to completely get rid of the need to grab the token in the create method here and manually pass it down to the form, and of course manually build up our hidden input. We're going to do that with a custom blade directive. Now if you're new to custom blade directives, let's head over to our safe submit service provider, and under the register method, let's just look at how we do this first of all. So we use blade directive here, and into this we give the name. In this case, I'm just going to call this safe submit. The closure here is what we can use to optionally get in an expression, which we don't actually need to use, and return something in here. Let's just return ABC and see how this works, just making sure we import the blade facade at the top. So if we go over to our form, let's now use safe submit up here, and we'll see how that looks. So let's head over to our form, and sure enough we get that value. So pretty straightforward to create your own blade directive. Now we need to think about actually returning the hidden input in here. Let's just do that manually now, and then we're going to go ahead and look at an issue with just returning a string inside of here. So let's say input type of hidden, and we're going to set the value in here to, of course, the value from safe submit. So let's go ahead and pull in safe submit in here, and we can do that using app and safe submit class. Let's make sure that is imported. It should be anyway because we used it down here. And in the value here, let's output the safe submit token. So essentially just removing the need to manually pass this down to our view. Let's set the name for this as well, which we know is going to be the token key. So again, what we can do is use safe submit token key, and that's another reason that that method is really helpful. Now let's check this out, and before we do anything, let's get rid of the hidden input that we manually added in there. Let's give that a refresh. Okay, so we get undefined variable safe submit. Sure enough, we just need to bring it into scope within this closure, and let's go over and give that a refresh. Okay, so it looks like it's working. We've got our name in here, which is what we set in that service class, and then the value of the token. Now when I refresh this, notice that this is not changing. Although when we set this up in our middleware, we set this up to work for every single request. Now let's just bring in Laravel debug bar just so we can see what's going on with the actual session value. So let's bring this into our project and we'll see what that session value looks like. So once that's finished installing, we should see the debug bar just at the bottom. There it is. Let's open this up and let's go over to session and check out what we have in here. So we've got a token in there, which is our cross-site request forgery token. Let's just pull this up a bit because I think it's hidden, yeah. So we've got our safe submit token, which has a value of 6JR to start with. Let's inspect our form and let's pull this up a bit. A little bit tricky on a smaller screen to get this to view. And we can see here that the safe submit token starts with FK, which is what we originally had. So basically the safe submit token value is changing for each request, but it's staying the same within our view, and that is due to caching. So what we actually want to do is have this evaluated every single time we hit the page. Now to do this, let's get rid of everything that we've done in here and just start from scratch, is to actually create out a PHP expression to echo what we want out. Let's just test this out with what we have at the moment. So I'm going to go and echo out app within here, safe submit and token. So let's just see what that gives us. Let's go over and give that a refresh. And for this, we might just need to go ahead and clear out our views. So let's say view clear, and let's go over. And at the moment that does not exist. That's probably just because we need to give the full namespace to this. We'll fix that up in just a second so it's a little bit easier to work with. And again, let's just make sure we clear our view cache. And there we go. So that token is now being updated within our view every time we hit this, because at the time that this is used within the view, it's echoing out the actual value every single time rather than just returning a string which will get cached. So the solution now is to pretty much use this, using the full namespace to this, plucking it out of the container and grabbing this with an echo. So we want to echo out the input for what we want to see in our form. Now let's get rid of the need to use the prefix for this by heading over to config and app and coming down to our aliases. Now we can add the alias in here as safe submit with the full namespace to the class. So that's app safe submit, and save submit, and the fully qualified namespace to that. So now we should be able to get rid of this and see it working exactly the same way. Just going to go ahead and clear these view caches out, give that a refresh, and sure enough that works. More importantly, these two values match. So let's go over and just start to echo out the actual input. This can get a little bit messy, so let's just try this out. We want to echo this out, and maybe for the outer we can use double quotes here. And then for this inner one that we want to echo, let's just build up the input first of all. So the name, the value, and then we'll start to replace these out. But what we're doing is we're replacing these out within this string. So let's go and just escape each of the double quotes so that doesn't interfere with the double quotes we have outside, and that should be fine. So that will work as normal, we just won't have any values inside of our view. So let's again just clear our view cache out, give that a refresh, and there we go. So we've got an input type of text, of course, because we've not set this type to hidden, but we can do that now. Now we just need to replace the name out. So for this, we just want to concatenate within here app, save submit, and then token key, and then do exactly the same thing for the value like we did before. So again, it gets a little bit messy. There are probably better ways of doing this, but for now this is fairly simple. So let's again grab the token value from here. So we've got the token key under name and the token value under value. So let's clear our cache out, go over, give that a refresh, and there we go, that works. Now let's compare these two from Laravel debug bar, and you can see that every single time this changes, which is great. That's exactly what we want. So we can actually get rid of this now because we're directly referencing this inside of the expression we've created in here. So we can get rid of all of that, and sure enough that works as we would expect. So now that we have done that, we can come over to the post controller. We don't need to pass the token down anymore, and we don't need to grab that from there. And of course we don't need to inject the save submit instance into the create method. Let's give that a refresh, and sure enough this looks like it is almost working. We're not quite there yet because remember what we've now done over in that is set the name of this hidden input to the token key, but over in the post controller we're using a request token. So let's fix that up as well by dynamically grabbing out the property name from save submit under the token keys. That will now match up with the item that we're sending down, that hidden input value. So let's click create post, and that should work. And let's go back and double click this, and we should get a 419. Great. So that's just moved that over to a blade directive. So if you did want to implement this functionality, you literally just need to put the blade directive in here, much like you would do with the cross-site request forgery token. Next up though, we want to kind of refactor this over to make this work in middleware instead. So let's do pretty much the same thing, but handle the prevention of this in middleware, so we don't need to add this to our code for every form that we build. So much like we did with create just here, let's move this over to middleware so we can control where we want this to work and make it a little bit more reusable as well. So let's create out some middleware in here, and let's call this handle safe submit. I'm just going to go and change the name so it's a little bit easier to remember. And let's open up handle safe submit. And at this point, we pretty much are good to go and copy this over. We just, of course, need to make sure that we pull save submit out of our container. So let's add this over in handle in here. And we still want to regenerate the token at this point. That's really important. So let's go ahead and pull save submit out of our container using the app helper. And we shouldn't need to make too many other changes. Of course, make sure we import that at the top as well. So from the request, which of course we get within middleware anyway, we want to grab out the token key, make sure it doesn't match the token, and if that's the case we abort, and then just regenerate. So let's go over to our post controller. Of course that isn't middleware that you want to globally add, you want to specifically target this at the point that you want to use it. So let's go ahead and apply this middleware here. This can be done within the controller or at the root level, it doesn't really matter too much. So let's say handle safe submit, and let's apply that only to the store method, and of course make sure we import that as well. We can tidy up some of the things that we have in here if we're not using them, like save submit. I don't think we're referencing anywhere either, and generate save submit token we are also not using. Okay, let's try this out. So let's go over and hit create post. That looks like it worked, and let's double click it, and that failed. Great. So really simple to just move this over to this middleware to handle this. But now all we really need to do when we're building up forms is apply the middleware where we want this to work, and in our form make sure we include the save submit token. Let's just play around with the idea of redirecting the user to their intended location rather than showing the error page that we see just here, because that's not very helpful at all. And of course, this is going to be an optional feature. If we decide to set it, you might want to fail it and ask the user to do something else. So let's just do this roughly with session inside of here. Let's just add in some kind of intended key. Of course, we'll switch this up a little bit later to make it more unique to what we're building. But let's go ahead and set this to the route that we want to actually go through to in here. So we will keep the redirect just in here for now, because of course that actually needs to run, but at least the intended location is set before we do this. So on the first run, if we were to duplicately submit this, the intended session value would be set, and then we would redirect the user over to the right place on the next attempt. So to check if we have this set, let's go over to handle safe submit, and inside of here, of course, we want to do this before we abort. So the first thing we want to do is check if that actually exists. So let's go ahead and say intended, and we'll pluck out of the session using that intended key, and then we'll go ahead and redirect the user. So let's say return redirect, and we'll go over to the intended location. Let's just try this out. So I'm going to clear the Laravel log out because we won't be able to actually see if this is working. And let's hit this once, and that works, and we get created. And let's go back, submit this twice, and we're redirected over. Sure enough, that's only been run once, but it almost looks like we didn't double submit it. We're still being redirected over to where we should be. So now that we've got that kind of down and we know how to get this working, let's refactor this so we can actually use our safe submit service class. I'm going to bring that back into here for now. We're going to look at a slightly different method of doing this in a bit. But let's bring this back in here, and let's, instead of doing this, switch this out to a method. So let's say safe submit set intended, and let's pop the actual route into here. So that's route posts and show and 1. Great. So now over in our safe submit class, let's add in the set intended method, and let's put that in there, taking in the intended location, so it's a little bit more reusable. So with this now, what we can do is over in handle safe submit, we can grab this out. So let's create another method, get intended, and let's return session get and intended. Now we'll switch this key up in a minute as well, that's really important, but for here we can say safe submit get intended, like so. So that's moved all of that over to our safe submit class. Let's just double check this works, and then we can go ahead and refactor it a little bit further. So let's click that once, double click it, and we're redirected over. Great. So the first thing we're going to change is the key here. So let's go up to the top here and create out a intended key, and we'll say safe submit intended, and again we'll create another method in here to grab that out. So we'll say intended key, and let's return intended key from here, and then from here what we can do is access intended key in case we want to change that. So we'll do the same thing in here as well. Okay, let's just try this out again, double click it, and we should go through to the intended location. Great. Now the next thing we want to do is think about, do we want to be doing this every single time, and then also including the redirect in here if it's only submitted once? The best thing to do here would be to actually return the value of the intended redirect, but also set it at the same time. That would reduce the need to do this kind of in two places. So let's move this over to something like this. I think this works a little bit better because it almost seems like we are redirecting to the intended location. So let's go over to safe submit and switch this over to intended instead, and we can still put this in as we need, but then we can return the redirect to the intended location, and that will of course be returned and will still redirect if that was only submitted once. Let's try this out. So let's click this once, and that looks like it worked, and let's try this twice, and that worked as well. Now with this, the only issue is we're keeping in the session the intended location, which we don't really want to do, because if we try and submit maybe another form and this value gets picked up, we're probably going to be redirected over to the wrong place. So over in safe submit, we probably want another method in here to forget the intended location. So let's call this forget intended, and let's just say forget intended key, so that will clear that out. So over in the handle safe submit, before we redirect, let's forget this. So let's say safe submit forget intended, and that will clear that out. Still redirect the user because we're assigning this at the point that we get it, and we should be good. So let's go over and give this a refresh and just double click this, and there we go. So the redirect should disappear. So with that done, that's pretty much the bulk of what we're trying to achieve. We now have a form that can't be submitted twice, and we're also bringing in the ability to redirect the user to an intended location so they don't know that they've double clicked it. So this still works nicely. If we just head back over to our Laravel log, sure enough, we can click this once. That of course creates that record or does something else. If we do this twice, sure enough, we're still redirected, but we only invoke that once. So that is everything that we wanted to build in really easily. We just use our middleware, and of course over in the create form, just use that directive. Everything else is handled for us behind the scenes.